Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Medicine for These Times. I'm so excited to have Dr. Dave Rabin here with us today in upstate New York, right down the street from me. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Good, thanks. It's so nice to be here with you, Beth.
So good to do this interview again. So I just want to let people know, I actually interviewed Dr. Dave at Psychedelic Science, and it was this great discussion. I got an Apollo to test. And then somehow in the internet world, the interview was lost and not usable. But I'm so excited to have you here now because now I've spent at least 4.5 weeks hanging out with an Apollo Neuro, and wow, I am really excited to have the audience learn about this and your path. And I will just give a little introduction. I had worked with the Apollo while under the influence of sacred plant medicine in Peru recently. And so we're going to get into that too, because it's just fascinating what you've done here. But let me tell the audience a little bit about you. So Dr. Dave Rabin is a neuroscientist, board certified psychiatrist, health tech entrepreneur, and inventor who's been studying the impact of chronic stress in humans for over 15 years. He's the co-founder and chief innovation officer at Apollo Neuroscience. In addition to focusing on integration therapy, plant and natural medicines, couples therapy, and medicine-assisted psychotherapy, Dr. Dave specializes in treatment-resistant mental illnesses, including depression, anxiety, and PTSD, psychosomatic disorders, personality disorders, chronic pain disorders, insomnia, and substance abuse disorders using minimal and invasive treatment strategies. He's always been fascinated by consciousness and our inherent ability to heal ourselves from injury and illness. He has done a lot of research. I will let you speak into it because I want to hear your story. I want the audience to hear about you in your own words. So, what's your background and what led you to even get into neuroscience, psychiatry, and then, creating this device? And what is your relationship with psychedelics and medicines yourself as well?
For sure. And again, it's such a pleasure to be here with you again. Thanks so much for having me. I think my journey started perhaps a little bit younger than most people's because the very first time when I was a kid, I used to have very vivid dreams. And dreams are often thought of as, especially in the meditation, yogic, Ayurvedic, and Eastern world, and even the tribal medicine world, dreams are thought to be some of the very first psychedelic experiences that we ever have as humans. And of course, I didn't know anything about that at the time. I was, between the ages of like 4 and 7. But I remember having very vivid dreams, and they weren't always good or bad. Oftentimes they were just neutral, but they were so vivid and real that I would find myself referencing them in regular waking life. And in conversation, like I'd be talking to my brother and I would mention something that we did together and he'd be like, "What are you talking about?" And I'd be like, "Oh, instant recognition. You weren't there. That happened at night in a dream." And that was really interesting to me. Over time, after I started going to school as a kid, like many people, school introduces a lot of unknowns and stressors into young children's lives. And I started to have more hard dreams, nightmares, and things like that. And so I went to my parents and I said, "Hey, parents, what are these things that I'm experiencing at night?" And they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. They're not real." And, as a kid, I think the main reason why they said that, which, makes sense to me now, is that they were just trying to make me not afraid of going to bed. And I think that was helpful. At the same time, I kept having them and they kept feeling very real. And what that did for me is it started to make me question, what is the meaning of this word real, right? Like if the adults say that real is only when we're awake, but I'm experiencing what feels real when I'm sleeping, then perhaps there's more to this word than people are letting on. And, maybe that's something interesting to look into. And so over time, that kind of like spurred my interest in consciousness and meaning making and reality from a young age. Although, of course, I didn't really know what I was interested in. I didn't have the words to describe it, but it kind of like, sowed that seed in my brain. And then over time, I just started to, read psychology, neuroscience as a teenager, and then started to work in some neuroscience labs and started to realize how amazing some of the work was going on, and how it was changing the way we understand life itself and what it means to be human and what we're capable of as human beings. And ultimately, that led me down the path of becoming a clinician, a doctor. And I really wanted to study, how do we heal, and what kinds of things make us sick, and what kinds of things make us, grow and become stronger as human beings, and really find our full potential. And then I worked with some really inspiring scientists. I had great mentors. I was very privileged to have great mentors through my training, and that led me down the neuroscience PhD path and studying chronic stress and aging, and then on the cellular level. And then when in 2012, I actually had a very good friend. I wasn't even thinking about going into psychiatry, but I had a very good friend from Pittsburgh, and she always knew she wanted to be a psychiatrist, or at least for a very long time. And she kept telling me over and over again, she's like, Dave, you really should become a psychiatrist. You make a great psychiatrist. And I was like, whatever. Psychiatry at that time was one of the least respected fields of medicine. And a lot of the other physicians, considered psychiatry to basically be guesswork. And so it wasn't really appealing to me. I was planning to become a neurologist or an ophthalmologist or something more along those lines. It was more in the hard sciences and had, a rigid framework around it. And then my friend sent me an email in 2012 with like 10 or 12 of the most exciting papers that have been published in the psychedelic research space. And I read them all and stayed up all night. And then within 36 hours, I knew what my path was, that I could actually study the stuff I had been fascinated by as a kid, consciousness and reality and all these things on a whole person mental health level. And then that led me to psychiatry.
Wow. This is incredible. I love this. I have a very similar story where it's like these things that started happening at a very young age that, of course, at the time there were no words for. And to now look back and see like, wow, here I am doing what I knew I was here to do at age 7, or age 8. But let's talk a little bit about, how you got into Apollo Neuro and creating this little tiny device, and what inspired it. And then also, we'll get into first what it is and what inspired the creation of this, like with your work or your own personal experience.
Yeah. So first off, it actually ties to the first part of the story I was telling you. So first off, Apollo, you see me wearing it here on my chest. It's a wearable device that delivers soothing vibrations to our bodies that can be worn anywhere on your body, that gives us a sense of renewed safety and what we call in the therapy space embodiment. So that means it's just being centered, having our minds centered in our bodies, and being present in the moment. And that presentness in the moment is what ancient Eastern medicine folks and tribal meditation folks and these people have been teaching for thousands of years. Even Hippocrates taught about this, the forefather of Western medicine. But over the years and the generations, the millennia, we've kind of lost sense of that with, all the hecticness of modernity and all of our added responsibilities and overstimulation. And so I realized that we had kind of lost this in the healing world, and that this was something that was really interesting to me, because whether you look at I've always been interested in people who have illnesses that are not responding to the standard Western treatments. And that whether it's aging diseases like dementia or macular degeneration that result in blindness or loss of our brain function, memory, or whether it's PTSD or depression that doesn't get better with medication and therapy, there is something about these folks that are not responding to the treatments we have available. And in the case of PTSD, just to give you one example, this was like 70% of our patient population that was not achieving their long-term treatment goals in terms of being, more, symptom-free or mostly symptom-free long-term. We were not seeing this. And that was with multiple medication treatments and multiple therapy trials. And it was really frustrating for us and our patients. And like many discoveries that happen in medicine, it's the pursuit of finding new ways to help these people who aren't getting better that drove me to really dive into psychedelic research. and to dive into not just psychedelic research, but meditation practices and studies, mindfulness, yoga, exercise studies, and how that impacts mental health, breath work, and biofeedback, all of this stuff under the sun, because we're trying to find literally anything that can help people with the least amount of risk. And so ultimately, I got my own, this led me to get my own MDMA training after meeting Rick Doblin in 2016. And three of my colleagues, Rick was very gracious and got me and three of my colleagues trained in MDMA-assisted therapy in Hudson, New York, right near you. And from there, that just really reemphasized this idea that we were taught in medical school and our psychiatry training, which is that this thing we call the therapeutic alliance, or the trusting bond built between a clinician and a patient, is absolutely, that makes the patient feel safe and trusting of the healing experience, is the single most foundational and critical piece of the puzzle to help people recover. And so from that, really centered around safety. And we know PTSD is this disorder of a dysregulated or mismanaged fear response. So as I started to see these relationships between threat interpretation and fear versus safety, and looking at everything from MDMA therapy to meditation, mindfulness, yoga, breath work, I realized, and soothing touch, of course, I realized that all of these techniques, whether you're using MDMA therapy or you're using the other things I just mentioned, the natural techniques, they all seem to work by boosting the pathways in our body that respond to safety in the environment. And we call those the parasympathetic nervous system or the vagal system. And that, after I started to see those common pathways, we thought, well, okay, if all of these are targeting the same system in different ways, MDMA does it molecularly, breathwork does it through the respiratory and the cardiovascular system, touch does it through the touch receptor system, soothing music does it through our ears, but they all have the same part where they meet in the brain, the emotional cortex and the amygdala, then perhaps we could develop techniques like Apollo that activate those systems naturally, that don't require a drug and don't really require much effort on the part of the user. And years of research later, and double-blind randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials at the University of Pittsburgh Department of Psychiatry, we actually figured it out. And there were certain rhythms that you could deliver to the body that the body would feel, and it would change the way we felt by centering our heads back into our bodies, just like deep breathing or mindfulness practice, and helping us be more present. And that rapidly decreased this aberrant or unwanted threat response that was overactive in healthy people who were stressed and people who had PTSD alike. And then that led to the creation of Apollo that was released as a consumer product in January of 2020.
Wow. This is okay. So now, see, this is why I'm glad we actually lost that first interview, because now that I've worked with this Apollo, because I don't even know what to call it, worn it, slept with it, worked with it. I've done client meetings, group client, everything. I have a completely different perspective on it. And so Dave knows when you guys first reached out, I was like, oh gosh, I had heard of you guys since 2020 because we were both very active on Clubhouse. But I initially was like, oh, a wearable device, like delete, like I'm just not really into, even though I love technology, I've never been into that whole quantified self thing and the tracking and the Apple Watch. Like I don't do any of that. I don't even wear ear pods, and I probably never will. So I kind of just wrote it off as like, oh, it's a wearable and I don't care about that stuff. But then when you reached out to me, I don't know. I think we forwarded it to my podcast producer, and she was like, oh my God, I cannot live without my Apollo. And I was like, what? And so she's also a friend of mine, and she's also a former client, and she's had a lot of chronic health issues. And she had mentioned how great this Apollo is. She doesn't go anywhere without it. And I'm like, what? Let me look into this. So my own experience of it has been, it's been interesting. And then I, at one point was like, what the hell is going into my body right now? Like, I hope this isn't messing with my brain. But I have to say I've slept really well. I've had some very intense dreams. When I wore it down in Peru on my retreat, I was sleeping for it was a retreat, so sleep is a huge part of it, but 10 hours at a time, like really deep sleep. And now that you explain it as connected to, these physical responses in our body and our brains, and that feeling of safety and centeredness, which to me, I've talked about for years, and I mention this to all my clients, seems to be the root of so many problems in our society. It's not even just, treatment resistant conditions or PTSD, but even, me dealing with, let's say, a regular client who's starting up a business as an entrepreneur. They're constantly in fight or flight, right? There's always this and I remember going through this as an entrepreneur, that fear and that, how am I going to survive? And am I safe putting myself out there? Am I safe starting up a business? And you mentioned this, this response that so many have. And I'm curious, how has the Apollo and this kind of research that you've done also been helpful to the psychedelic space? Where's the connection to the psychedelics?
So full circle, right? The Apollo was really heavily influenced by psychedelic medicine. I think I can safely say that without understanding and having the direct in-person training with MDMA assisted therapy and really seeing how MDMA works to treat people who have never responded to treatment ever for PTSD, it just made it really, really clear how important safety is. It just, we knew it was important, but it was taught to all of us as clinicians, but it was even more emphasized in the MDMA training because psychedelic medicines like MDMA help people feel safe enough to be vulnerable with their deepest, darkest secrets and fears, right? The stuff that can be so painful to remember that we've buried it deep down, so deep down that perhaps we don't even remember it, right? Consciously, we can't recall it because we've sequestered it away because it's so hard to think about and invokes all of these really upsetting or negative feelings about ourselves. But what psychotherapy has taught us in the study of PTSD is that even if you bury it deep down, it's still there, right? It doesn't actually leave. You have to process it and bring it to the surface to process and feel safe enough to bring it to the surface to process so that you can move through it. In the psychedelic therapy world, we say the only way out is in and through, right? So this was really fascinating to me. And so we started to figure out that when you are in a psychedelic experience and safety is paramount, that having tools like before we send patients in, we try to teach them breath work, we try to teach them mindfulness, we try to teach them somatic techniques like self-touch and things like that ground you and again do the same thing that Apollo does, which is center our minds back into our bodies. It brings us back into the present moment. And when we saw how powerful those techniques were and that they're taught in virtually every single psychedelic assisted therapy training, that doesn't matter what drug you're using, that these can completely transform somebody's psychedelic experience. So when we started to see that, we had released Apollo into the world as a prototype first between 2018 and 2020, and then as an actual consumer product in 2020, we realized that people were just using this in psychedelic therapy. They were using it in their ceremonies in South America and in Mexico, and they were using it and in the States, and they were using it in clinics, in ketamine clinics, to help people drop into ketamine experiences by reducing some of the anxiety and the resistance and the fear around the unknown of what's going to happen when this drug gets administered to me. I'm not necessarily super comfortable with what change might come or what I might be exposed to, even though it's just part of me. There's still a little apprehension anxiety, and that anxiety creates resistance, and that resistance prevents people from having good experiences. And worst case can actually result in what many people call bad trips, right? So as we started to see that, and we were in tandem with all of this, we were getting this feedback from people in the real world using it for these things. And then we were doing studies in parallel for the FDA that will be submitted to the FDA for things like PTSD and ADHD in kids and other disorders, traumatic brain injury, et cetera. What we saw coming back from those early pilot studies were dramatic shifts in people, like shifts with 80% response rates that people were feeling better, And that was really promising and exciting for us because it was just continually validating what we were finding in the lab. And I showed some of this data to Rick years ago, might have been like 2018. And Rick was like, this is really interesting. This thing can't hurt people. It's just music for your body. In the MAPS trial, we can't do anything for people after they're done with the trial. We don't have any, the trial protocol specifically says after their 12 weeks of MDMA therapy that they continue to follow up with them and ask them how they're feeling and do surveys, but they can't give them any recommendations for other things they can do. So that's very different than what we do in our practice or in most psychiatry practices, where you treat people for an extended period of time and you give them continued support afterwards. In the study protocol, it's 12 weeks and then you're on your own. And so Rick had this really brilliant idea where he said, if this can't hurt people and you're getting these kinds of results with people with PTSD without MDMA, then let's write a protocol where we give Apollos to people. We allow anybody who's ever been to a MAPS MDMA trial to get a free Apollo after their MDMA experience has completed and they're done with their final follow-up with MAPS. And let's see what happens, and let's track them at year 1, year 2, year 3 after they've received Apollo. And so fast forward to today, that study's been approved. It's recruiting as the very first trial ever studying a wearable device as an intervention. It's not a tracker. It's actually delivering a positive and gentle, soothing sensation to the body and on the go. And it's facilitating, it seems to be, from what we're seeing in the real world data, from the ketamine clinic data that are just ketamine clinicians using it in the wild, and from other studies, although we don't have MAPS data yet from those subjects, but we're seeing Apollo really helping with integration. That period of when you're done with these life-changing, life-transforming experiences you're trying to figure out how to make sense of, what do? If you haven't mastered breathwork or meditation or mindfulness, well, you can use something like Apollo that helps you tap back into those feelings of being embodied and grounded and safe in your own skin. And so now Apollo is the very first wearable that's ever been used in conjunction with psychedelic-assisted therapy, which is really exciting.
I love hearing this. And again, especially as someone who's now tested it and worn it and had positive experiences. And I'm glad you just mentioned it's not a tracking device. It's not a quantified self. There's no data going to Apple. At least I hope not. Thank you.
Only with your consent.
Yeah, right. But it is interesting. So I had been, I'm one of these people. I generally sleep well. I do take, I take magnesium before bed. I have a herbal sleep thing. I just like to be knocked out, and I tend to wake up once or maybe twice, and I do go back, but it's still just annoying, right? And I'm also one of those people that's if I do wake up and there's energy, it's I have so much energy that I could go run a marathon at 3 a.m. So right. I was like, well, if there's something that can make me sleep better, let me test it. And it's harmless. I just clip it onto my clothes, whatever. And my experience was there was some shift in me. I could feel something different, and I was like, I have no idea how this is working, but I'm curious, especially after meeting you and finding out you're not just another, psychiatrist, scientist out there. You have a background with medicine. We'll get into the story of going down to Peru and how the ICROs are actually quite similar to this Apollo Neuro, and that's what sold me. But then, I brought it to Peru with me to just test out. I was like, well, let me test this during a ceremony and see. I want to disclose I did not do it during a night ceremony because there's tiny little lights, which I could have hidden, actually. That would have been easy enough. But I did it during our last daytime ceremony. Yeah. Or I could have just told the other people I have a little device, no big deal. But I wore it during the daytime ceremony, and this was an extremely powerful ceremony. The whole 10 days was quite powerful and challenging for not just me, but a lot of people. And during the initial onset, which is always the most challenging, the first hour and a half to 2 hours, going through the waves and, allowing things to move. But it was definitely, I mean, there were other people having challenges. I put it on during a moment where I was like, whoa, like, am I going to make it through this one? It's our last one. It's really challenging. And I put it on and I was like, well, let me see if this could, I don't get caught up in fear too much, but once in a while I still do, because I'm so used to the fear that I know now it's like not really real and I'm able to soothe myself. But sometimes the mind, especially under the influence, will loop right into these like
Yeah, all of
worst
us.
case.
Happens
Yeah.
to everybody.
Yeah. So I put it on and it was weird. I could actually, it's like I could tune in on a different level. I could feel like, oh, there was kind of this knowing of like, oh, this reminds me of being rocked as a baby, even though I have zero memory of being rocked as a baby. But it was that same feeling. And, I could feel this in my nervous system kind of, and also maybe diverting my attention from the mind making up worst case scenarios and diverting it to, the one place in my body where it's like, oh, okay, the soothing, kind of like also the same thing I do when the curandera I work with, she allows people to sing. She actually encourages singing, and a lot of us know her music. So when I've noticed when I sing, and again, this is science, it's like vagus nerve stimulation. When I sing, it takes my mind out of the doomsday thinking of like, oh my God, something's wrong because this medicine is so intense right now. And it brings me into this place of like grounded, mindful safety where my nervous system is just almost on autopilot of like self-soothing, like a vocal, because again, I've done a lot of vocal work around like how to actually, somatically calm the body with your own voice. And I was like, wow, this is the same thing, but it's just it's like a slightly different mechanism. I just didn't understand the neuroscience, and I kept having this image of like, are there like waves going into me? But of course there's always waves going into us, right? But I want to have people hear the story of how, like plant medicine, ayahuasca, Icaros influenced your path to also, this research and finding this Apollo Neuro. I'm curious how it's interconnected.
For sure. So so this is a good segue because you're familiar with Om, right?
Mm-hmm. Very.
So what is Om? Om is a tone that we can each make ourselves that is relatively similar between human beings. Maybe the pitch is slightly different depending on your size and shape, but in general, it is a almost universally calming experience of frequency in the form of sound generation that we create internally just by making the intentional decision to say or hum Om, right? And the reason why this has existed for thousands of years and perpetuated, and why people still use it as a mainstay for calming and meditation and yoga, etc., is because, and this is not the only version of this, there are Gregorian chanting and there are Tibetan monk throat singing and chanting. All of these different kinds of things induce certain wave patterns of what we call resonance or harmony in the body, between the brain and the body, and between our heart and lungs, and in our whole nervous system. It creates harmony. And harmony is effectively, simply put, if you imagine our brains and bodies together as one system, like an orchestra, right? And that orchestra can play in tune or out of tune, or in time and rhythm or out of time and rhythm. And for anybody who's heard a band or an orchestra play, if they are out of tune or out of rhythm, even if one of those things matches but the other doesn't, it sounds absolutely horrible. and it's really hard to listen to. And that is what we call dissonance, or the opposite of resonance and harmony. And that is what we as human beings are experiencing on almost a moment to moment daily basis, with all of the incoming information that we're overwhelmed with, including emails and responsibilities and our children screaming or our friends' children screaming or the news or whatever it is. All of it, construction sounds outside, right? All of it creates dissonance. And that's why music that we hear, that we like when we're working or doing something, puts us into what we call a flow state. Flow is mind-body harmony or resonance. So that is fundamental to the understanding of why all of these techniques that involve the production of or listening to sound work on the body to induce states of calm. So that's kind of the framework. Does that make sense? So then the second step is that in 2017, I grew up as a musician. I was never particularly great at music, but I really loved it. And I always, as I got older, I stopped playing music that much myself, but I started doing more singing, and I sang an a cappella group in groups, multiple groups in medical school. I really love singing. And I just noticed, it had this really great calming effect on me. And over time, I started to study music and the neuroscience of music that really kind of led into and very heavily influenced the discovery of Apollo. And around 2014 through 2016, I started to become fascinated. I became familiar with psychedelic research in 2012, but a few years later, I started to become fascinated with the way tribal cultures use music, like the Shipibo people in Peru, and how they use music, literally live generated music that they're singing specifically to the group and then specifically to an individual to effectively change or modulate the experience in their state that they're having under the influence of something like ayahuasca. And again, these are traditions that are thousands of years old. And so as I started to read more about this and read Jeremy Narby's work and some of the other people that he's interviewed, these very famous and well-spoken, well-regarded indigenous tribal shamans, I started to just become absolutely fascinated. And the fact that this was live generated, right? They're literally, the shamans have trained through oral tradition mostly, and through their practices of interaction with the plants, to intake information from what's happening and read the energy of the room effectively, and then generate sound vibrations that they're singing to the room, to those participating. And so as I started to read about that and become fascinated with it, I said, I have to understand what this is. And so in 2017, I led a research trip with a group of researchers from Yale and NYU and a couple other folks down to Peru, and we went to study Shipibo tribal medicine. And we were able to sit in ceremony, this incredible privilege of sitting in ceremony with 5 lineage trained shamans who were not just singing so like individually, they were singing in harmony together, and to feel what it was they were doing firsthand. And from having those experiences, it was just one of the most powerful experiences. And you don't even need to be under the influence of ayahuasca to feel what they're doing with their sound waves, right? It's just, there's something about what they're doing that is doing something regardless of the drug, the medicine. And that just reaffirmed, again, a lot of these ideas that I had about music and sound impacting the body. And then this was in the early days of Apollo and working on Apollo. And so when we started to experience that and see what they were doing, and then see that other shamanic cultures were also doing similar things, we just started to pull at those threads. And as we started to pull at those threads, we started to realize that there are certain rhythms in the body that were in the Western world discovered through biofeedback, which is that heart and lung resonance. That is, 95% of healthy people who get thrown into a biofeedback setup within 90 seconds achieve resonance between their heart and lungs without really having to do anything except sync their rhythms. And that rhythm they sync to is between 5 and 7 breaths per minute for almost every single human being. And so this became the Western science of breath and biofeedback, combined with what we were learning and studying in tribal culture, combined with our own personal experiences with music as a research team, led us down this path of integrating all of that into effectively wearable music that you can feel, that doesn't require you to consciously do anything or participate. You just have to feel it. And the feeling part of it creates an experiential learning that kind of nudges the body into states that you're trying to achieve. Just like having your favorite song follow you around every day on a soundtrack, right? It's like, you need a little more energy, let's put on that favorite dance party music. Or you need a little bit more calm, let's put on that relaxing music. You need a little bit more meditation or help getting into a meditative state, let's put on that meditation music or the sleepy music, right? And so this actually worked. And it was the first research project that I worked on in my entire career that actually worked, and worked not just in healthy people, but worked in people who had very challenging mental illness issues. And when you actually, the most interesting part to me is when you're talking to the people who run the MDMA trials with MAPS, or you talk to the people who do the ketamine work, or you talk to the experts, or you talk to the shamans in Peru, and you ask them, what are you doing to people, right? What is your stuff, your medicine doing to the people who you're doing it to? And they say trauma, right? Their word for what they're helping with is trauma. And in Shipibo culture, trauma is the blockages to our natural energy flow, and the rhythms that they sing to people are actually like what they describe as breaking up those blockages that allow our energy to flow cleanly and smoothly through our body. So when all of that put together, it was just sound, right? This is the thing. This is it, and this is what we need to focus on. But maybe we can deliver it not through the ears. And then we started testing that, and then that became the wearable music that is Apollo.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love this because, I've been deep on this path for a really long time, and been doing a lot of like somatic work and voice work and meditation and, just all the things, nervous system regulations, grounding exercises. And, they've all been such great medicines in addition with the medicine, like sitting with shamans and doing all these other tools as the integration, as the day-to-day. And as I'm sitting here listening to you talk, I'm like, wow, it's just so fascinating that we're living in 2023 and there's this reality. I always remind people, like, we can't, even though we all know like ancient wisdom traditions are pretty much like the answer, right? It's like everything circles back to the way it was always done. But here we are in 2023 with these tools at hand. Like, we have these electronic devices, and why not have modern day tools to help us function better, live happier, be more joyful, feel safer to go, share ourselves and follow our path and get along with others. I find it really interesting because as someone who's like resistant to technology, even though I love technology, I've been online since 2014, 2013. There's that part of me, and I'm, who's been like skeptical and like, oh, I don't know, I just want to do things the way they were always done and just connect with the plants. But then we live in the 2023 right now, and then obviously into the future. Hey everyone, just a quick break to remind you that the True Path Entrepreneur Group Mastermind program is open for enrollment now. We start at the beginning of 2024 in January, but we are starting to take applications now. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the Mastermind webpage on my site at bethaweinstein.com/mastermind. This is a 12-month group community-oriented mastermind program where you learn how to start, grow, and get clients in your business so that you can help more people, make a difference in the world, and do work that you absolutely love. This mastermind program is designed for new and early stage coaches, healers, psychedelic entrepreneurs, therapists, and anybody who wants to do transformational work in the world and wants to learn the exact steps you need to know to grow your business to the next level, to be able to share your unique medicine and make a difference in the world. So again, that's bethaweinstein.com/mastermind. The True Path Entrepreneur Group Business Coaching Mastermind Program is open now. I'm curious, what has the reception been? You guys had a very amazing presence at Psychedelic Science. You've been doing online marketing. You've been kind of out there with your own podcast, doing podcasts. What is the reception of people in this space, like in the psychedelic space or even the therapeutic space? And are people like me and my podcast producer, are we the early adopters still? Is this like, just the beginning. Because I do want to say, you know, with the way the world's changing and the acknowledgement and realization that we have all these ancient tools at hand, I've been saying this for years, like the power of sound and voice and, you know, anything like internal soothing mechanisms, breath work, they've all grown so much in popularity, I think, because people are finally realizing, wow, these actually work and these will help me. You know, and people, I think, when they hear this are more willing to try. But yeah, what's the reception been as a business owner? How has it been for you guys?
I mean, the reception's been very good. You know, we have over 100,000 users in the last 3 years, which is pretty phenomenal. People are really digging it. They're, you know, constantly writing us, you know, week over week. We get feedback from people from the community that is unprompted. It's literally people writing to me or writing to our team, telling us about how they can now socialize with their family or a family member can come to dinner and hang out for an extended period without feeling stressed or anxious. They can go out and hang with their friends. They can work a job where they haven't worked in years. They're no longer in emotional or physical pain. I mean, they're no longer addicted to X drug, right? And so I think as an addiction and trauma psychiatrist, to me, the drug stuff, the decreased reliance on tools outside of us that are not natural to within us is actually the most promising, because if you can give somebody a stimulus that's natural, like sound, that reminds us that, you know, what all the ancients have been telling us for a long time, from Hippocrates to Ayurveda to Chinese medicine to tribal medicine, the medicine's right here, right? It's not out of here. It's not outside here. It's here. And it's our denial of that actually makes us sick, because then we externalize all our power. We give it away to something that we feel we then need to put inside of us to feel good or to feel like ourselves. And that is a lot of the psychosocial emotional reason for why we're sick. And if you go back to, you know, Kundalini is a great example of that. The word Kundalini actually means, and I relearned this full understanding of this term recently from an expert yogi and friend, Katie Silcox, who explained to me in a way I've never heard it before, that Kundalini means that which is asleep within us, right? And that which is asleep within us, which awakens in certain powerfully safe experiences that facilitate healing and transformation, is our recognition of our own divinity, right? That we are never alone. We are always connected to something bigger than us, and that we have the power within us to decide our future by learning how to use what all this good stuff we're born with, right? And it's that simple recognition, which is so really simple, you know, really simple when you break it down, that we are inherently divine, just by nature of being born human on this earth in this life, that we are connected to all that is holy, or all that is bigger than us, right? Everything, the universe, etc. That recognition, that understanding is what radically amplifies our sense of empowerment, our sense of independence, and our ability to recognize that we can heal ourselves, which is one of the single most important things about being human. So you know, to me, like that is kind of where it all centers around. And the psychedelic community in particular, and the meditation community, have been incredible supporters of Apollo, because they see Apollo as the tool that helps to illuminate people to that realization, right? It's the idea of what a lot of Tibetan monks describe as the path to enlightenment, which is literally right in front of us in every moment. It's always there. Just requires this concept of illuminating ourselves, right? It's illumination is the idea that we start to realize that we are inherently divine, or that we could be inherently divine, that we're special and connected to everything, even though we might have been taught that we're not. And so it's tools like Apollo and tools that are like our breath and our movement and what we direct our attention to, and what we do with ourselves, and our intention, where we put our human energy, and thinking about that and being conscious and mindful of it is really what allows us to level up and transform as human beings. And so the response has been great, and the fact that we have, like, you know, tons of clinicians treating hundreds of patients with this product, which is not a medical device, it's a consumer wellness device, and without a prescription, we have hundreds of patients being treated with this product just by psychedelic clinicians alone over the last couple of years, has just been further affirmation that this is radically changing people's lives, and we couldn't be more excited to bring something like this to the community.
It's so incredible. And I love what you just said, which is the truth. That, first of all, it's always the path of simplicity, right? It's all within us. But of course, what we all see is that people find this so challenging to just turn inward and go internally and, like, turn to all these ancient wisdom traditions of, breath work, sound, soothing, calming the nervous system, getting on the earth. But, we live in this world. And it's just, I feel like this is, literally the interview I had before you, we spent about 20 minutes talking about just feeling safe and how this is, like, it's a common issue, especially here in the Western world, that no one even feels safe enough to even, like, speak up and say something anymore. We're in this world of just, like, nervous system, overstimulation, and everybody, like,
Judgment.
And I mean, not even that. It's like, driving on the road and road rage, and then, like, the fear of just survival on earth. And all of this is, like, again, inherently within us to find that deep connection to self, to source, to earth. And, and if this is one simple way to help get you there a little bit more, why not give it a try? I also wanted to say, the one thing I forgot to mention that actually was probably the most influential moment with me in this Apollo Neuro was not just the ceremony, but the ride back. So the ride to and from where I was in northern Peru is about 6 to 7 hours, sometimes even more, on a one-lane, windy road through switchbacks in the Andes Mountains, where you're in a car and you're passing, like, 18-wheeler trucks going up these roads where there's, like, a cliff. It's kind of, I almost canceled last year when I went. I almost canceled the trip because the airport was closed. So we had to take the road. And this road is actually, like, the dreaded drive of, like, oh my God, is this even worth it? But all of us, who go there are like, yes, it's so worth it, that we're willing to be, like, totally freaked out on this crazy drive for 7 hours, where, by the way, the drivers are locals. So for them, this is, like, no big deal. And they drive like race car drivers. It's really intense.
Been there.
So I wore the Apollo Neuro. And at one point on the way back, when I could actually still feel medicine in me from the day before, I was, just not in the best place. I was, like, still kind of high, and I, like, driving, like, this crazy downhill, like, windy road. I turned it on, and everybody I was with was like, I'm going to be sick. People are like, maybe we should pull over. And I was sitting there in the middle, like, in the hump of the back seat, like, laughing. And I was like, why do I feel okay? Like, this shouldn't, because I totally get anxiety from things like that. Like, I don't do well on long drives to begin with, and I don't do well on long, windy, roads with a race car driver and, that doesn't speak English on top of it. And I was, like, really calm, and I was actually okay. And I'm like, I think this thing is really working. Like, that was the highlight. Yeah. So I'm so glad you guys have put this out there and really gotten your voice out there and are speaking about this. And, I'm going to tell my clients, I actually was like, maybe I give this to all my mastermind clients the first week they join as just, like, hey, this is a requirement. You have to use this throughout this journey of 1 year together. Maybe I see what happens.
Yeah. The more, I think it just goes back to the fact that, like, our bodies, it's just learned behavior, right? So our bodies have learned to be stressed. And when we learn anything and practice it over time, even if it doesn't serve us, we get really good at it. And that's what got Eric Kandel the Nobel Prize in 2000, was discovering the origins of learning and memory, and that they are highly conserved for over 300 million years, right? They're not unique to us. And so if we understand that they go back long before humans into ancient primordial sea snails that have, a fraction of the neurons that we have, that there are also ancient ways that help us to evolve, that we've evolved to tap into the opposite of that fear response, which is safety. And that the body knows what to do in the situations that are not actually a survival threat. Like arguably driving down that road is on the fringe of survival threat, right? But you're also not driving and you're kind of out of control of that situation. So do you spend your entire time in that car for that 6 or 7 hours thinking about all the things you're out of control of so that you feel even more out of control, which then results in one of the chief symptoms of anxiety, which is racing thoughts and nausea? Or do you remind yourself of what you are in control of, which is that you establish trust with this driver? He's a local. You've trusted him to get you from point A to point B. And I'm going to focus on that. And I'm going to focus on my body. And I'm going to focus on what I can control in this moment, like my breath or how the feeling of the soothing vibration on my body. And then all of a sudden we can teach ourselves over time to rewire our brains around focusing on things we can control rather than things we can't. And that inherently is the chief tool that we use from a mindfulness standpoint of teaching people how to control their own thoughts and effectively their anxiety. The more time you spend thinking about things you're out of control of, the more out of control we feel. It's that simple, right? The more time we spend, on the contrary, thinking about things we are in control over, then the more in control we feel. And evolutionarily, feeling out of control is the single biggest reason for that feeling of anxiety. And one of the first feelings of anxiety is nausea. And it comes up right here in our solar plexus, right? So that is right where the esophagus basically meets the stomach. So that is a huge component of these practices that we teach people. But what we're finding now that's so exciting is technology can help, right? Technology doesn't have to be something that just gives you information all the time and tells you to do stuff differently. It can actually intervene. And that is where we're seeing this exciting movement into the future of effectively what we like to call the convergence of modern medicine, which is not just looking at things only from a black and white Western medicine approach, which I was trained in, but also in being inclusive of tribal wisdom and Eastern Chinese medicine wisdom, which talks all about these pressure points and acupoints on the body that are evidence-based that can reduce nausea and help restore a sense of control and autonomy over the body. And you don't have to be a Chinese medicine expert to access them. You can use tools like Apollo that bring in to our lives some of that knowledge through experience and feeling. And that is, at least for now, our contribution to the community.
So good. Oh my God. So much wisdom. I could do a whole episode together with you on like our society and this whole illusion of control and the need for control and how it's like just so much stress and anxiety. And, we see this, I hear this every day. It's like my clients, people that come to me,
Same.
Thinking like, oh, I have no meaning. I have no purpose. I'm trying to figure out some fulfillment in life. And then really it's like this deeper root cause, it's like this constant, like, as they say, it's the rat race. It's literally like the spinning and the spinning and the spinning of these deeper root issues. And I spend the large majority, especially with my private clients, like working on these root causes and very little at the level of like, oh, what are you going to do next in your business? It's like, no, we need to tackle the root in order to then just allow yourself to be your divine essence and flow through and be what you're here to do in the world. So yep. Dr. Dave, tell me, tell people where they can find Apollo Neuro and anything coming up for you guys in the next, 6 to 12 months. I keep imagining having like a whole bed, like a mat version of it. I was like, wow, that'd be really nice to go to like get body work or acupuncture and you're just laying there and you're getting like double dose. Or like a mat you can sit on during ceremony where it's like lightly vibrating and you're like, But yeah, what's next for you guys?
So anybody who's interested in Apollo can check it out at apolloneuro.com or apolloneuroscience.com. That's APOLLONEURO.com. Or you can go to wearablehugs.com, which is what the kids call it. It'll take you to the same place. And I think what's next on the horizon that's exciting is I should also say, if anybody's interested in learning more about the connection between psychedelic states and healing, understanding psychedelic states, understanding how technology and psychedelics come together, check out my two new shows, Your Brain Explained and The Psychedelic Report, which is your single source of truth for the psychedelic news. And you can find those both on Apple and Spotify. But I think going back to your other question about what was your other question?
What's next?
Oh, what's next? Of course,
If you're developing any, like, I don't know, big blankets I can wear. No, I'm kidding.
Well, so it's not actually. So what's next that's really exciting is really software focused, because when we built Apollo, we built a hardware. This is our first hardware device. And what's really interesting about Apollo, even though you mentioned that you were asking if you're an early adopter earlier. So what's really interesting about Apollo is that early adopters typically are not people like you. They're young men who are under 35 years old, who are trying to enhance performance and recovery or in the biohacking space. Mm-hmm. And that is typically does not include, not always, of course, there are exceptions, but the majority of those groups tend to not be women aged 25 to 55 who are looking to get better sleep. And it turns out over the years, what we've seen is that the gross majority of our customers are women aged 25 to 55 who are looking for better sleep, which is one of the main things that Apollo helps with. And we have some really exciting data on our website that talks about some of the preliminary results we've had around sleep and performance and cognitive and physical performance and recovery. But we've kind of crossed over the early adopter barrier. And the device that exists in the market right now, similar to a Tesla, the early Teslas, is capable of running much more complicated software than what we originally launched back in 2020. And so we've been very privileged with having an incredible team that we've run that has come to us and interested in working with us, that have come on over from lots of places like Apple and Google and Facebook and people from Nike and Aura and places like that, who are just really excited about building this software that customizes Apollo to the user and upgrades the current device. You don't have to buy a new device. It literally upgrades your current device to just have rapidly expanded functionality that starts to be more automatic and intuitive and learns about you and then personalizes your experience to you, that requires even less time from you to do anything, right? So the first example of that is we just released a couple months ago as a membership program for iPhone users to start, which is called Apollo Labs. You can sign up for it in your app, and it's an annual membership that tests the first ever, from what I've seen, an first ever application of artificial intelligence to solving a public health problem. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that we have a lot of complex public health problems that there are no solutions for. There's no medication solutions. There's no therapy solutions that work well. And what is one of the ones at the top of the list that many people all struggle with, that you mentioned you struggle with? Sleep. Unwanted middle of the night wake-ups, right? Because if you wake up, if you actually get to the point where you're like consciously awake at 3 a.m. and you are already awake and have the energy to like run a marathon or go do a bunch of work, it is with racing thoughts or a fast heart rate, it is extremely challenging to meditate yourself or breathe yourself back to sleep. And those are the best techniques to this day that we have to fall back asleep. There's no medications that work well for that. There's no other technology that works well for that. But Apollo works really well for that. And we saw that in the first 3 years of people using Apollo, one of the most common uses was people they'd fall asleep with it and then they'd wake up in the middle of the night, and as they're just starting to come to wakefulness, they just reach down, tap both buttons, and restart the sleepy vibes, and that would put them back to sleep, and they wouldn't wake up. And so we trained Apollo, thanks to, and we're so grateful to all of our incredible users who have donated their data voluntarily to our research studies for sleep. We have been able to train Apollo to actually detect and predict when you're about to wake up in the middle of the night and then rock you back to bed without you having to do anything. And then over time, it learns about your specific sleep signature and what your sleep, without any other device, it learns about when you're sleeping soundly and what that looks like, and when you're sleeping in a disturbed way and waking up and what that looks like, and then turns on automatically to keep you asleep when you don't want to be awake. And it's not going to stop you from attending to a crying baby, and it's not going to stop you from needing to pee so you wet the bed, but it will stop you from having racing thoughts and waking up feeling like you need to go to work or run a marathon at 3 a.m. And that single feature has actually been one of the most exciting things that we've developed. And it's one of the first applications of AI to solve problems that we don't have any other tools for. And it really works. Wow. I can tell you that it works because I have people who have been testing it who don't know they've been testing it because they're part of our beta group. And then we have follow-up calls, and I tell them that they're testing it, and they're like, so do you think that's why I've been getting better sleep the last month than I've ever had in as long as I can remember? And I'm like,
maybe.
Yeah. That's probably it. Because they haven't, and they're like, have you changed anything else? They're like, nope. And I can tell you, my wife, who is also a CEO, entrepreneur, founder, she's a CEO of Apollo. I learned to sleep soundly in medical school, because in medical school, when you work so hard, you learn, and you're so sleep deprived all the time, you learn to fall asleep and get good deep sleep whenever you can. But it can be challenging. But I do not have personal problems falling asleep. But when my wife has trouble sleeping through the night, which she has had for the 10 out of 11 years of our relationship, she wakes me up. And that now, since we released this feature, she sleeps soundly through the night. And now I sleep soundly through the night. And so it's just fascinating to see how we can start to, rather than talking about AI taking over the world and destroying all humans, we can start to think about it from a new angle that's really exciting, which is how can we leverage the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually create better lives for humanity? And it all starts with better sleep.
Wow, that's so great. And I'm sitting here going, yes, that's me. Because I usually just have to pee. And most of the time I'm fine. I go back to sleep, but it's more just annoying, it's more, and then the times that I don't, it's more like, why? And it's always at the exact same time. And my acupuncturist claims it's because of some, a body part or whatever. But it's just so much more pleasant to go into like these really deep sleeps and have amazing dreams. And wow, this is amazing. And and I also agree. I was just talking to someone about AI, and I'm like, there's positive and there's negative, and there's like anything that exists known to man, there's always going to be beautiful outcomes that come of it. So please, there's no need to be scared of it all. But Dr. Dave, this is amazing. We're going to have all the links to Apollo Neuro, to the app, to your podcast right here in the show notes. Everybody be sure to check them out, and be sure to check out this device. As someone who's a skeptic, I can actually say, hey, I'm not a skeptic anymore. And actually I'm going to test it with a friend of mine who's been going through a lot of like energetic awakening. And I was like, why don't you test this out and see what happens? So there's a lot of cool experimentation that we can do with it, because, it's not like it's harming anybody. So awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It was so great to have you on.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And if anybody wants to reach out to me on socials, I'm at Dr. David Rabin on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Threads. And I love to hear from you. So please hit me up.